Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I bring a new pair of words to share their stories with each other and you. You can find our past episodes and the occasional blog post on our website at lexitecture.com. Follow along with us on Twitter and Facebook at Lexitecture, and if you really like what we do, you can support the show at patreon.com/lexitecture.
Today's episode, solo. I'm not going to lie, solo episodes are a million times harder than recording with Ryan. There are lots of different reasons for this. I think the main one is that, above all, Ryan and I are buddies. We could literally talk to each other for days on end without ever running out of things to say. We're both interested in a wide range of topics, and we'll have enough common areas of interest and enough different areas of interest to always have something to either enthuse about together or inform the other one about. And as much as I love the sound of my own voice, it's difficult to talk into the void without getting any immediate response from another human being. Don't get me wrong, I'm not the sort of person who hates to be alone and who constantly needs validation from someone else. I most definitely need time on my own, otherwise everyone suffers. But doing episodes like this isn't really why I was interested when Ryan suggested that we should record a podcast. Mainly, I just wanted to chat to my friend about words. But of course, sometimes there are more important things going on in a person's life than chatting to a friend about words. And Ryan's exam is most definitely one of those things. At time of recording, he's actually finished sitting his bar exam. But despite his commitment and enthusiasm, I pointed out that recording a podcast episode right after you've spent 6 weeks studying for a 4-hour exam that you've only just completed sounded like a great way to fry a human brain. Last time I recorded a solo episode was also the first time I'd recorded a solo episode. And it was so weird and unfamiliar that I found myself doing a totally hilarious impression of Ryan just so I wasn't entirely alone. Of course, now that Ryan is basically a lawyer, I feel as though I should treat him with a little more respect. Plus, isn't it a crime to impersonate a lawyer? I don't know if my impression was that good, but it never hurts to be careful. Another difference is that for solo episodes, I write down what I'm going to say first and then read my writing aloud so I don't find myself with nothing to say. This throws up all sorts of additional concerns. I don't want to sound as though I'm reading, but also it turns out it's quite hard not to sound as though you're reading when you are. Then, of course, there's the conundrum of how much to write. When recording Lexitecture episodes with Ryan, we never consider whether or not we have enough to say. We just chat and suddenly the time has passed by and an episode has happened. I found myself checking out my first draft on a site called voices.com, which gives you an estimate of how long it will take to read however many words are involved. The only problem with that is that it asks you to input your average reading speed. I have absolutely no idea how fast or slowly I usually read, and even less of a clue as to how fast I usually talk. It depends on how often I interrupt or am interrupted, how enthusiastic I am about the topic, how generally calm or agitated I feel that day. I think I definitely err on the side of too fast in general conversation and in unalloyed excitement, but I also, in my life as an English teacher, have definitely encountered the badly prepared student who thinks that by reading their talk very slowly, they will make their inadequate word count stretch out to the required time. Hopefully, I don't have to resort to such cheap tricks and tactics for this episode. My word today is, unsurprisingly, solo. Solo is one of these words whose etymology is very commonly known, I think. It's a pretty straightforward word. The Latin root solus, meaning alone, gives us solo, but also soul and solitary. This week I had a lovely day out with my husband, my sister and brother-in-law at a beauty spot called the Solitary Rocks. The rocks in question are about a 45-minute drive from home, and then you take a very pleasant woodland walk alongside a river before you reach the rocks themselves. Of course, not only were there two people already at the solitary rocks when we arrived, those two people were a friend from Dundee and her daughter. They were watching the salmon leap, which, as we'll see, is a particularly appropriate thing to do in a solitary place. But when it doesn't involve unexpectedly meeting friends, solitude is a lonely business. And while solo definitely refers to a single person, I was really interested to find that the first citation given by the OED for this word refers not to solitude, but to a musical solo. The form of the word given, dating from 1695, and quoting Congreve's Love for Love, says, "I don't much matter your solas or sonatas, they give me the spleen." By 1710, the second citation, we find the now familiar form solos once again being paired with sonatas. In the quotation from Tatler, "There is not a labourer or handy craftsman that in the cool of the evening does not relieve himself with solos and sonatas." It is clear, however, that the oldest usage of this word definitely refers to musical performance by a single instrument or voice. And given that both music and solitude are great areas for abstraction, it's probably not surprising that figurative uses of this sense come next in the OED. In Tom Jones from 1749, Fielding writes, "Though the pedagogue chose rather to play solos on the human instrument." It has just occurred to me how incredibly rude that sounds. Don't blame me, blame Fielding. It should be noted that this Tom Jones is not in any way related to the Welsh singer, to the best of my knowledge, other than that both were, a very, very long time ago, considered a bit sexy. I seem to remember that Fielding's novel was pretty risque for the 18th century. That probably explains the rude quotation. Dr. Tom Jones was also my dissertation supervisor at university. He was one of the experts in 18th century literature, which I always thought must be very annoying. A bit like being a physics professor called Dr. Einstein, or a home economist called Dr. Meringue. He was a very lovely and helpful teacher, despite the fact that our interactions were marred somewhat by my now husband asking me every time I had a dissertation meeting, "Did you throw your knickers at him?" I can confirm that I did not even once. Instead, he kept me on the straight and narrow as I researched editing, copyright, and the Wesley brothers in the 18th century, which is not even a little bit sexy. Anyway, back to solo. While solos were originally musical, until Fielding got his grubby hands on them in any case, in 1787 we have the now obsolete sense of a carriage accommodating only one person. Then, from 1814 onwards, senses relating to something achieved alone. I was very interested to see that the first of these senses relates to card playing, but as I have no idea how to play either whist or ombre, I can give you no further details. From 1911, we have solo flight, as technology flies past, and a rather lovely reverse engineering quotation from T.E. Lawrence's letters. "All decent birds hop it when their infants have done their first solo." We also have the sense acting alone or without assistance. Specifically in New Zealand, this sense is used of single parents. There are plenty of musical compounds too. A solo flautist, a solo organ stop, for example. Then, of course, we have the word soul. The OED's first meaning gives us having no husband or wife, single, unmarried, celibate. This has been in use since the late 14th century, much earlier than its musical relative. Chaucer gives us the OED's first citation from The Merchant's Tale. "Ne wold that she were loved ne wife, but ever live as widow, sole as the turtle that hath lost her make." While this usage is largely obsolete, the OED notes that it was chiefly in legal use and frequently of women. It seems that even in the Middle Ages, being single was still more acceptable for men than for women. My personal favourite word for unmarried women is spinster, and despite being in a long-term relationship, I referred to myself as a spinster right up until I finally decided to get married. There's something musty and interesting smelling about the word spinster. It makes me think of second-hand bookshops and making things out of wool. Since both of these are things that I love very much, I was quite happy to be a spinster until I ruined everything by getting married. Sense 2 of soul is given by the OED as without companions, apart from or unaccompanied by another or others, alone, solitary. This is first cited around about 1400 and used pretty consistently throughout the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. There are further obsolete usages and definitions. With no other person or persons, without participator, partner, sharer, etc. in something, especially in rights, duties or possessions. One sole, one and no more, one only, a single person or thing. And of things or qualities, etc., unaccompanied by other things or qualities, standing alone. Of course, there is the definition that would be most commonly attributed to the word, one and only. As in Swift's Gulliver's, sole intention was the public good. Presumably this was why he travelled. The OED cites examples of this usage from 1497 to 1883. It does strike me as rather ironic that a word that has its etymological roots in being alone should have so many meanings and usages. But I am a human being who likes irony quite a lot, so I won't apologise. In case you're wondering, soul, as in alone, is not etymologically linked to sole as in the bottom surface of the foot. This Latin root, solia, means sandal, the bottom of the foot, or a flatfish. The fishy connection here also extends to the muscle in the lower leg named soleus. Its name comes from it being, loosely speaking, fish-shaped. So looking for solitary salmon leaping at the rocks of solitude, while very much an example of folk etymology rather than pure etymology, still strikes me as rather pleasing. Etymonline gives me my last word on soloing. It defines the Latin solus, not just as alone, but gives its meaning as alone, only, single, sole, forsaken, extraordinary. While solo episodes don't affect my marital status, and certainly don't make me the only host of this podcast, I know that I'm not forsaken. Ryan will be back next time. As for extraordinary, I'll leave that up to you to decide. Word Nerd HQ had a question for us. Larry Jones asked about two different words, said that he'd been discussing the meanings with some friends. The two words are respect and fear. Now, meanings are not always my strong suit because context affects them, which Brandon was good enough to comment on in the group. And I think that context is something that has so many different factors influencing it, and context can also change depending on history, the people using it. Context is contextual, is my point. But I can tell you a little bit about the etymologies of these two respective words. Respective. See what I did there? Respect was the one that I found really, really interesting, in fact, because the OED says that respect, the noun, meaning regard, consideration and related senses, is first used around about 1398. The meaning being given here is regard, gaze, visual attention, especially in to have respect to direct one's gaze towards, to regard, look at, or to face. This is interesting, I think, because it's one of these words that is kind of etymologically obvious when you think about it, but I hadn't ever had cause to think about it. It's made up of Latin, respectus, classical Latin root, and we can break that up into re, as in back, like revise, and spec, which is the same root that gives us words like spectate and spectacle. To respect is simply to look back or look around. I think this is really interesting considering the much loftier, more complex meaning that Larry and his friends may have been debating. The sense of what respect is and how it's shown and how it should be gained and lost is a much more complex notion than looking around. Although, of course, you have to look around to find these things out. It also made me think about eye contact, as in, if you respect someone, you're able to look them in the eye. I don't know if looking back and looking forwards is a bit of a leap for me to be making there, but as I say, I found it really interesting that it's kind of a stealth, obvious etymology, back, and spect, to look at something. Fear, on the other hand, is a Germanic root. So we find it in Old English, we find it in fact in Beowulf. Fair, and the quotation which I'm going to mangle the best way that I can, he se fair begeat, is in Beowulf, which is Old English undated. The etymology given in the OED uses this fair, F-A-E or F-R, as corresponding to Old Saxon far. They give the meaning here as ambush. And Etym Online also talks about this sense of sudden danger. That seems to be key to the meaning, the etymological meaning anyway, of fear. Calamity, sudden danger, peril, or sudden attack, from the Proto-Germanic feras, meaning danger, ambush, harm, distress. Words like that. And this comes to us from a PIE root, per, finally a PIE root that's easy to pronounce. And the meaning of per is given as to try or to risk. I thought this was quite interesting. These days, trying is generally perceived as a positive thing to do, whereas fear is perceived as a negative thing. Perhaps the Old English Proto-Germanic peoples saw that risk always and trying always has a little bit of fear implied and didn't necessarily see it as a bad thing to do. This PIE root per has tons and tons and tons of cognates. It is a root forming prepositions, so meaning forward, in front of, before, towards, things like that. So moving towards things, hopefully that you're looking at clearly, gives us fear. Etymologically, fear and respect are in no way linked. In terms of their meaning, I think you can keep discussing that, Larry. It sounds like an interesting chat.
And that's it for another episode of Lexitecture. To get in touch with us about something you heard this episode, you can email us at words@lexitecture.com. You can also follow along and talk to us at Lexitecture on Facebook and Twitter, and at Lexitecture Podcast on Instagram. For back episodes and the occasional blog post, visit us at lexitecture.com. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.